The architecture of the unseen. To speak of the shadow is to speak of an absence that is paradoxically full of void, that hums with the echoes of all we have refused to acknowledge. Carl Jung did not discover the shadow so much as name what has always been there, a presence as ancient as human consciousness itself. It is the psychological equivalent of gravity, invisible, yet exerting an undeniable force on the shape of our lives. But unlike gravity, which operates with impersonal precision, the shadow is deeply personal. A mosaic of our individual and collective repressions at its core. The shadow is not merely our dark side in the simplistic sense of evil or malevolence. It is, rather, the repository of all that we have exiled from our self-conceptrates, impulses, and potentials that do not align with the identity we have carefully constructed. The diligent worker buries his laziness. The kind-hearted soul disowns her rage. The rational thinker suppresses his mysticism. These discarded aspects do not vanish. Instead, they gather in the unconscious, forming a counter-self that Jung described as the thing a person has no wish to be. Yet, in a twist of cosmic irony, it is often through this disowned self that our greatest gifts and gravest wounds emerge. One of the most profound illusions of the ego is the belief that we are singular, consistent, and fully known to ourselves. But the psyche is not a monolith, it's a parliament of voices, some loud and some whispering, some honored and some banished. The shadow is the collective murmur of those voices we have tried to silence. When we say, "I would never do that," it is often the shadow that answers, "But you have, and you will again." This is not a moral failing, but a fundamental truth of human nature. We contain multitudes, and wholeness is only possible when we stop denying the parts of ourselves that contradict our preferred self-image. A crucial dimension of shadow work is recognizing that the shadow is not static. It evolves as we do, shaped by culture, upbringing, and the ever-shifting landscape of our personal narratives. What was once deemed unacceptable in childhood rebellion, vulnerability, ambition may linger in the shadow long after society or circumstance would permit its expression. Conversely, traits we once proudly claimed may later become sources of shame, retreating into the darkness as we grow. The shadow, then, is not a fixed enemy but a dynamic mirror, reflecting back the parts of ourselves we have yet to reconcile. Jung also observed that the personal shadow is entangled with a collective shadow, the disowned darkness of families, nations, and even humanity itself. This is why we project so readily onto others. The qualities we cannot tolerate in ourselves, we condemn in those around us. The bigot who rails against immorality is often wrestling with his own repressed desires. The activist who burns with righteous fury may be fleeing her own capacity for cruelty. Projection is the psyche's desperate attempt to externalize what it cannot face internally. Shadow work, therefore, is not just a personal endeavor, but a cultural imperative. Until we reclaim our projections, we remain trapped in cycles of blame and conflict, forever fighting the monsters we ourselves have created. Yet the shadow is not merely a foe to be vanquished. It is also a wellspring of vitality. The energy bound up in repression is immense. Think of the effort required to perpetually mask insecurity with confidence, or to smolder with unexpressed passion. When we reclaim these disowned parts, that energy becomes available for creation rather than concealment. The fieriness of anger, when integrated, can fuel determination. The vulnerability we hide can deepen our compassion. The shadow, in this sense, is not a curse, but a crucible, where the raw materials of the self are alchemized into something more complete. This leads us to the heart of Jung's vision Individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who we truly are. Individuation is not about perfection, but about authenticity, gradual unpeeling of the masks we wear until we stand, flawed and whole, in the fullness of our being. The shadow is not the obstacle to this process, but its essential partner. Without it, we are mere caricatures, flat and one-dimensional. With it, we become living paradoxes, gentle and fierce, light and dark, mortal and eternal. The journey into the shadow is, at its core, a journey into mystery. It requires us to relinquish the illusion of control, to admit that we are not the sole authors of our lives. Dreams, slips of the tongue, sudden emotions, these are the shadow's way of speaking, its language more poetic than logical. To engage with it is to learn this language, to listen for the whispers beneath the noise of waking life. It is to recognize that the self is not a fortress to be defended, but a vast and unfolding story, where even the darkest chapters belong. If the introduction is the threshold, where we first glimpse the contours of Jung's shadow work, then this section is the act of stepping further into the terrain, feeling the texture of its soil beneath our feet, and sensing the magnitude of what lies ahead. To understand the journey, we must pause here and take in the pillars that support it. For Jung, the shadow was not simply an abstract idea, but a living reality of the psyche, an undercurrent whose presence could be traced in dreams, projections, conflicts, and the quiet ache of incompleteness. To name it was to give shape to something ancient and universal, a pattern woven into the fabric of human life, like the dark threads in a tapestry that make the bright colors shine more vividly. At the heart of shadow work lies the recognition of the persona, that delicate mask we wear to interact with society. We could call it our social costume, the facade we assemble to fit into the expectations of family, culture, and the world at large. The persona is not inherently false, it is as necessary as clothing in winter. But just as garments conceal the body beneath, the persona conceals the raw complexity of the self. Beneath the mask lies everything we have hidden away, whether because it was deemed unacceptable by others or unbearable to ourselves. These buried fragments become the shadow. Some are dark indeed: anger, jealousy, selfishness, shame. Others are paradoxically golden: talent suppressed, passions ignored, vitality locked away for fear it might disturb the fragile balance of our daily lives. The shadow, then, is not merely the dark side, but the unacknowledged side. It is the sum of our denied realities, both destructive and creative. To reduce it to evil alone is to miss its essence. Just as the night sky contains not only darkness, but also the brilliance of unseen galaxies, so too the shadow contains not only destructive impulses, but also the treasures of a fuller life. Jung spoke of the gold in the shadow, the hidden gifts that await those who are willing to confront what they fear. Creativity often emerges from the shadow. The artist who dares to give voice to forbidden emotions finds new worlds of expression, while the leader who embraces their insecurities becomes more authentic and grounded. Another central theme is projection. Because the shadow dwells in the unconscious, we are often blind to its presence within ourselves. Instead, it reveals itself through our reactions to others. The traits we despise, fear, or condemn most strongly in other people often reflect the disowned parts of our own psyche. The angry outburst of a colleague may ignite in us an exaggerated fury, not because of their behavior alone, but because we have exiled our own anger to the shadow. Likewise, the qualities we idolize in others may represent the golden shadow. the brilliance we have yet to claim for ourselves. Projection is the psyche's way of holding up a mirror, showing us what we cannot or will not see directly. Shadow work begins when we stop blaming the mirror and dare to look at the reflection. Integral to all of this is the dance between consciousness and unconsciousness. The conscious mind is the small island upon which we build the structures of everyday life, but the unconscious is the vast ocean surrounding it. In the unconscious, archetypes stir, dreams unfold, and the shadow waits. To ignore this ocean is to mistake the island for the whole world. But when consciousness begins to dialogue with the unconscious, when the island acknowledges the sea, the psyche begins to integrate. Jung believed this integration was not optional. It was the task of individuation, the process by which a person becomes whole. Without it, we remain fragmented, ruled by forces we do not understand. With it, we move closer to the self, not the ego, but the deeper center of being that unites opposites. The still point around which the psyche turns, the theme of individuation, is central, for shadow work is not a standalone technique but a vital chapter in this larger journey. To individuate is to gather the scattered pieces of the self, to weave them into a more unified whole. The shadow is among the most significant of these pieces. To embrace it is to reclaim power, depth, and authenticity. The process is rarely comfortable, but it is profoundly transformative. Jung likened it to alchemy, in which base metals were transmuted into gold. The base material of our unconscious, the fears, resentments, suppressed desires is the very matter from which the gold of consciousness can be forged. Without shadow work, individuation is incomplete, like a painting missing its darker tones. Another guiding pillar is myth and archetype. Jung's brilliance lay in his recognition that the shadow is not merely personal, but also collective. Every culture has its myths of the underworld, of heroes confronting monsters, of journeys into darkness followed by transformation. These stories are not mere entertainment. They are psychic maps of the shadow journey. The dragon that guards the treasure, the descent into Hades, the confrontation with demons, all are symbolic echoes of the same truth, that what we fear most often guards what we need most. In this way, shadow work aligns each of us with a timeless pattern. We are not the first to walk into the darkness. Humanity has been walking it since the dawn of story. The practical dimension cannot be overlooked either. While Jung's language often drifts toward the symbolic, shadow work shows itself in ordinary life. A parent who cannot bear their own vulnerability may project weakness onto their child, shaping the child's psyche in ways that ripple for generations. A person who disowns their aggression may find themselves repeatedly victimized, unable to draw healthy boundaries. These are not abstract ideas, but lived realities, consequences of what remains unintegrated. Yet when such energies are faced and acknowledged, relationships deepen, conflicts find resolution, and the individual stands more firmly in their truth. Finally, one must understand that shadow work is not about eradication. The goal is not to banish the shadow, but to integrate it. To integrate is to allow its contents into consciousness, to acknowledge their presence without being possessed by them. Just as one cannot remove night from the cycle of the day, one cannot erase the shadow from the psyche. It is a permanent companion. The task is to walk with it consciously, to recognize it as part of the greater whole. In this recognition lies freedom. For to deny the shadow is to be ruled by it in secret, but to face it is to live with authenticity and choice. Thus, the core themes and concepts of Jung's shadow work weave together into a vision both intimate and cosmic. They remind us that beneath the surface of our daily lives flows a hidden river of denied truths, waiting for acknowledgement. They show us that the persona, the shadow, projection, individuation, and archetypal myth are not disconnected theories, but interwoven threads of a single garment, the garment of wholeness. And they invite us, each in our own way, to step out of the prison of one-sided identity and into the wider, more mysterious space of the true self. When Jung spoke of the psyche, he did not imagine a sterile machine made up of neatly ordered parts. He envisioned a living cosmos, a great interior constellation where forces of light and shadow, conscious and unconscious, danced in eternal interplay. To understand shadow work, then, we must linger among the essential motifs that give it shape, the archetypal pillars upon which this journey stands. These are not mere concepts to memorize, but living truths that weave through every dream, every conflict, every moment of self-recognition. They are the universal laws of the inner world, subtle as gravity yet undeniable in their pull. Foremost among these is the persona, that carefully wrought mask which each of us wears to face society. The persona is not false in itself, it is necessary. Just as an actor dons a costume to embody a role, so we too must adopt roles to move through the world. Student, parent, friend, leader, healer, seeker. Without the persona, social life would dissolve into chaos. Yet over time, the danger emerges that we confuse the mask for the face, the performance for the soul. We begin to believe that we are only what we present, that the polished facade is the totality of our being. The persona becomes rigid, fragile, and brittle, an eggshell shielding us from the reality that within us live impulses, desires, and truths that contradict the curated image. And here, in the hidden chambers behind the persona, we find the shadow. If the persona is the mask of light, the shadow is the body that casts it. Every trait we cannot or will not claim, every emotion, damned and acceptably, every memory, to raw, to birth these, sink into the depths of the unconscious. They do not vanish. They wait. They whisper from the margins, sometimes through dreams, sometimes through slips of the tongue, sometimes through sudden emotional eruptions that seem to take us over. The more we repress, the stronger the shadow grows. It becomes like a great reservoir behind a dam, its waters pressing against the fragile walls of consciousness. Eventually, cracks appear. But repression is not the shadow's only mode of existence. One of Jung's most penetrating insights was projection, the act of casting one's shadow outward onto others. We see in our neighbor the arrogance we deny in ourselves, in our friend the selfishness we cannot admit, in our rival the cruelty we secretly harbor. Projection is the psyche's way of disowning, of preserving the illusion of innocence while condemning the reflection. This is why relationships, both intimate and collective, become such powerful mirrors of the shadow. What irritates us most in others often carries a whisper of our own denied traits. To recognize this is not to excuse the faults of others, but to ask honestly, why does this stir me so deeply? Yet shadow work is not merely about exposing projections or dissolving masks. It is about individuation, the central, lifelong process of becoming who we truly are. Individuation does not mean becoming flawless or wholly good. It means becoming whole. Jung saw the psyche as a mandala, a circle striving for completeness, conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine. Light and dark all must be integrated if we are to approach the self, the center that transcends yet includes all opposites. Individuation is thus a sacred task, not an indulgence. To avoid it is to live split, fragmented, endlessly at war with ourselves. To embrace it is to take part in the great work of soul-making. Underlying all these processes is Jung's fascination with alchemy. The old alchemists, toiling in smoky laboratories, believed they could transform lead into gold. But Jung realized their texts and symbols were not only chemical recipes, but metaphors for inner transformation. The alchemical stages Negredo, Albedo, Rubedo described the psyche's journey through darkness, purification, and illumination. The shadow is the Negredo, the blackening stage where the old self decays and dissolves. Painful, chaotic, and frightening, it is nonetheless the fertile soil of rebirth. Without passing through the shadow, no gold can emerge. These concepts, persona, shadow, projection, individuation, alchemy, form the architecture of shadow work. Yet to treat them as separate pillars is to miss their deeper unity. They are strands of one great tapestry, threads that interweave to form the pattern of becoming. The persona conceals the shadow. The shadow erupts through projection. Projection, when recognized, becomes the doorway to individuation. Individuation unfolds through the alchemy of descent and integration. This is not a linear ladder, but a spiral, a process that circles deeper with each turn, leading us again and again to confront what we had thought was left behind. It is also crucial to see that the shadow is not purely negative. While it contains destructive impulses, arrow, rage, envy, cruelty, it also holds what Jung called the golden shadow, hidden talents, buried creativity, vitality we feared to express. How many artists, fearing rejection, suppress their creative flame until it emerges in distorted ways? How many lovers deny their capacity for passion until it burns them in secret? To confront the shadow is not merely to wrestle with demons. It is to discover angels in disguise, to reclaim treasures long buried under the rubble of repression. The cave we fear to enter, as Joseph Campbell once noted, holds the treasure we seek. In this way, shadow work becomes a paradoxical act of love. By embracing what we once rejected, we expand our capacity for compassion, both for ourselves and others. When I know my own capacity for cruelty, I become less quick to condemn another's anger. When I recognize my own selfishness, I can forgive with greater humility. The shadow softens judgment, not by excusing wrongdoing, but by reminding us that we too are flawed, and thus bound together in a common humanity and beyond the personal. The shadow manifests collectively. Entire cultures have shadows, the unacknowledged histories, the wounds buried under nationalism or pride, the systemic injustices hidden from view. Just as individuals project onto others, societies project onto scapegoated groups, casting their denied traits outward in cycles of oppression. Shadow work, at a cultural level, becomes an act of justice, a collective individuation that calls nations to own their history rather than deny it. So the themes and concepts of Jung's vision are not relics of psychology textbooks. They are living realities that shape our lives. To understand them is to hold a lantern in the labyrinth of the psyche. Without such light, we wander blindly, wondering why the same conflicts repeat, why the same patterns re-emerge. With it, we begin to glimpse the architecture of our inner world. And with that vision comes the possibility of transformation. From here, our path deepens into the symbolic. For these concepts, powerful as they are, cannot be fully grasped through intellect alone. They live most vividly in stories, myths, and symbols, the language of the unconscious itself. The next stage of our exploration will draw upon these symbolic narratives where gods and heroes, monsters and treasures mirror the journey of shadow work.